Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and there has been huge news as of recently for the global monetary system, especially with the US dollar going forward. Of course, world reserve currency. We've talked with Stephen Moore recently here at WAM, and Stephen Moore was a head contender at one point for the Federal Reserve. And he thinks the dollar is doing just great, and it just shows a lot of just this crazy delusion among these people that want to uphold this system that is failing. All fiat currencies eventually revert to their true value of zero. Always have, always will, going back to 1024 AD in China. And this time's no different, and everything we have been predicting is coming to fruition now. And as you know, as we reported on here at WAM, the Fed decided to lower interest rates. There's been an announcement over a month ago that landed gold and silver and crypto in rallies, but caused the dollar to go into kind of more of a bearish market. And as we're seeing, there's a lot of banks that are responding and reacting to this interest rate cut. Now, first of all, I should mention, as we've gone into, this is going on a global basis. I mean, Australia is cutting interest rates dramatically, and we're seeing in places like Britain, they're trying to lower interest rates. And
South Korea, Russia.
Yeah, and we're going to see the same thing happening as well in Canada as well, of course. But this is what we've been predicting for years and years. About 4 years, we've been talking about exactly what has happened. Desperately trying to push rates up and then them crashing down. And these bankrupt banks, again, are reacting to this. And when I say bankrupt, their cash deposit ratio, according to their own balance sheets, is really low. Much of the time, it's around 1%, if not less, of deposits covered in cash. But anyway, going into this article, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this Yahoo Finance article, JP Morgan, Citi lower benchmark interest rates following Fed rate cut. And of course, they're reacting as so. But I wanted to mention something that I found kind of interesting. And we're going to get back to JP Morgan soon, because what JP Morgan is doing is probably one of the most interesting parts of this video. But I want to go to Goldman Sachs for a second, because Goldman Sachs, they're trying not to be too overly bearish on what's happening, because they don't want to be outwardly bearish because they're already in enough trouble, and they're doing whatever they can to maintain some kind of sustainability, which they're not doing a very good job of, because, you know, banks kind of bury themselves and then they try to fix the problems with the same things that caused them in the first place. Now, anyway, as this article from Zero Hedge says, what would it take for the Fed to cut again? Goldman answers. And Goldman Sachs is talking about how they don't see a reason for them to cut interest rates again, but it says, Goldman's mini rant aside, the bank goes on to note that it saw the results of Wednesday's meeting as consistent with its baseline expectation that easing will end with a second 25 basis point cut for a total funds rate recalibration of 50 basis points, and sees 55% chance of 25 basis points cut in September, 5% chance of 50 basis points cut, and then 40% chance of no cut. I don't know where this no cut thing is coming from, because we're obviously looking at negative interest rate cuts in the future, but they're just trying to cover all their ground so that they can say that they were right. But I want to go into what they actually say in response to the question that inspires dread among traders. What would it take for the FOMC to not deliver a second cut at all? Here is Goldman's answer. And they said, like a couple of the journalists who asked questions today, we are admittedly less clear about the Fed's reaction function than in the past, but we suspect it would likely require steady growth numbers, a sizable move up in inflation to a level close to target, and a significant reduction in trade tensions. So that's not going to work out very well, because we've seen some serious problems in the bond market today and the stock market, especially with these tariff decisions on China coming from President Donald Trump. But as we've gone into before, these banks are completely bankrupt. They're insolvent. They've been pushed off and papered over with debt going back to 2008. The recession never ended, folks, and we're seeing a lot of these banks go down worldwide. You look at banks like Deutsche Bank, and they've been in a tailspin for a while, trying to merge, failing, getting caught spoofing, getting caught in controversies, and people basically doing a huge exodus of the bank, including I see in the future banks doing an exodus out the window at Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt, Germany. But going back to JP Morgan, and I think this is important, you know, the bank that just got caught in the biggest cocaine bust in history. I'm sure it was just a couple people on there.
It's Jamie Dimon's own stash, Josh. Come on.
Yeah, yeah. He needs all that to keep sane after all the. But I mean, like, it was the biggest cocaine bust in history that we know of, and they're like blaming a few people on the boat as if they were the ones capable of smuggling billions of dollars of cocaine. But anyway, that's a whole other story. I want to go into something that J.P. Morgan did on July 10th, and they announced this on their website, and I think it's interesting because it says a lot about what their reaction to the initial idea of cutting interest rates was, and that is that they want to rush out of the dollar as much as possible, and that's what's happening. The banks are getting out of the dollar. So are many countries around the world. So are many governments as far as swapping goes. But JP Morgan is looking at things like gold, and you could see this chart here, the FX exposure, current international JP Morgan client allocation, and our recommended currency exposure. So I'm going to pass it to John here and get John to explain this chart and what it means overall for the U.S. economy and when these banks that are completely bankrupt are rushing out of the dollar.
Well, this is interesting. So this is the #1 most systemically important bank in the world, ranked by the Financial Stability Board, saying that you should probably cut your allocation of US dollars down from 80% down to about 40. That's a 50% cut in your allocations of US dollars. Why would they say that when the US dollar is extremely strong and everything is fine over there at the US empire, and the US dollar is the strongest it's ever been? Why would JP Morgan contradict, like the biggest bank in the United States, contradict the actual US government completely and telling people to move out, like a lot out of the US dollar, and actually they are telling people to get about 5% into gold, it looks like, as well at the same time. So there's definitely something, some warning signs here. And of course they're saying to move into euros a lot more, and then to some pounds, and then of course have the Chinese yuan go into that quite more heavily, which basically wasn't even a 1% before, which has jumped to about 10% allocation. So they're seeing some shifts that, well, we've been seeing this for a very long time, that there's some serious issues, but I don't think having a new currency exposure, I don't see, where's Bitcoin in here, for example, and other cryptocurrencies that are solid, way more solid than some of these fiat.
John, that's the thing. That's the thing, because remember, JP Morgan attacked Bitcoin, but then caused it to tank back, I think, in 2017, and then bought up a bunch of it. So they're just up to their usual shenanigans anyway. I'm sure they are allocating a bunch in some offshore account somewhere.
Yeah, and of course, JP Morgan has their own blockchain platform called Quorum, which the Monetary Authority of Singapore is currently using. So yeah, they're just full of it. They're just trying to, they don't like that Bitcoin is getting all this momentum, because they are, the backbone of the US dollar. They're the ones that are printing the most US dollars in the world. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all the major banks in the United States, they're the ones that are printing the US dollars on a massive scale, because they go from, the $1 trillion in deficit that gets deposited into new money, through the fake bank account at the Federal Reserve, creating, $10 trillion out of that. Then you could create $10 trillion of new currency into the actual banking system. And it's just insane.
Well, this is why they're complete frauds, John, because I mean that ends up being charged onto the taxpayer. They're extorted for this via the enforced social contract usury via legal tender laws. I mean, it's complete fraudulent activity by a bank that is centralizing the economy to death.
Yeah, and if you don't see, I'm wearing a hat right now that is trying to, subliminally tell everybody a message here, if you paid attention to it. But it makes total sense that this is whole, the US dollar is backed by men with guns that are forcing people through extortion to pay taxes. And that is the whole backing of the US dollar. It's nothing
to pay off the interest on the debt.
Yeah, it's nothing but a mafioso, coercion threat that, we threat with violence and put you in prison forever if you don't, agree to this whole fiat currency system that we push upon you by law. It's a complete Ponzi scheme. And what you're seeing now is that even the banks are telling their clients to, move out of the empire. And there's a lot of danger there. Meanwhile, you have the Fed and others, It was funny, I was watching just the, I forgot, I think it was Max Kaiser that showed on one of his Kaiser reports lately. It was a CNBC host that was grilling, what's his name, Mnuchin, the Munchkin there over at the Treasury about money laundering laws and how they were going to hit heavy on cryptocurrencies because they're used for so much money laundering. And then actually, surprisingly, the CNBC anchor was coming after him and said like, hey, you don't understand, like US dollars is by far the majority of money laundering cases. And then it's like,
and terrorist funding and all of that.
Yeah, and then of course Mnuchin came and said like, no, that's total, that's not true at all. Like the United States dollar, we have solid AML rules. We have the new Taft rules that are coming out for anti-money
laundering. Yeah, but I mean, and well, they're going into the fact that much of the US dollar is digital. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, you can track Bitcoin, you can't track cash necessarily. But exactly. I wanted to actually get into something else with you as well, John, here, as I mentioned the Goldman Sachs reaction, and I want to go over this with you and get your reaction. As it says, Goldman's biggest criticism of what the Fed just did, in addition to crushing its credibility and eroding its independence, as Chris Rupke noted last night, is that aggressive insurance cut policies do not actually reduce the frequency of recessions because of the risk that unnecessary easing depletes the central bank's ability to respond to future downturns. What do you think about Goldman Sachs' reaction to this?
Well, I think the Goldman Sachs reaction is pretty obvious that just cutting interest rates, cut it. If you can say that. You should definitely look at the video that we just did that's up on YouTube right now a couple of days ago. That shows actually the interest rate cut and how throughout history, when they have been stagnant at a certain level and then they suddenly start cutting, they're not just cutting once, they're cutting all the way to the bottom in order to try to save the economy. And it's just utter BS again, with looking at the numbers coming out from the world economy when it comes to debt, when it comes to inflation. Everything is stagnating right now, their whole fiat Ponzi system. And the problem is they need more debt into the system, but meanwhile you're actually getting a deflationary pressure on the economy, which is people defaulting on their debt, people can't pay their debt, and so on. And that is the biggest nightmare of these aristocrats and these academic idiots over there at the Federal Reserve.
Well, more importantly, the U.S. government can't pay its debt and is only paying off the interest on the debt, and barely at that.
And then that's the same with every single government around the world. Nobody has any intentions to pay down the debt. And they say that, oh, don't worry, the U.S. government would never go bankrupt. Yeah, of course they won't, because they're going to just print themselves into oblivion. And
the difference is that the populace, for example, when they're in debt, they're dependent on this entity. When the government and the central bank, all these banks are in vast amounts of debt and their derivative exposure is massive, well, they're basically just screwed. And when you see interest rates going in the direction that they're going in, and where you see, for example, the idea of negative interest rates coming up on the near horizon, which has to happen at this rate, it has to happen. When you see that happening at the same time as we're in a depression, as we are in a financial crisis, that is seriously bad news going down the line, and that could lead to some serious tremors that's going to affect everyone if they do not listen to what we have been trying to say for years. We predicted that the Fed would try to desperately raise interest rates. We predicted that the Fed eventually would not be able to raise it anymore, and they would have to lower interest rates out of desperation again. We predicted that they will go negative. We haven't seen negative yet, but just watch. It's going to happen, and we will, unfortunately, be proven right. I don't want to be vindicated in this, but the fact of the matter is, this is obvious. This is basic economics, and they have been papering over a problem forever now, and it cannot go on much longer, especially as we see this everything bubble worldwide, where there's a currency crisis on a global level. You see the pension bubbles, you see the multi-quadrillion-dollar derivatives bubbles, the student loan bubbles. It's gotten to the auto bubbles, housing bubbles. It's gotten to the point where it's just so ridiculous, it's almost comical. And we have to tell you guys, this is what's happening. You should be concerned, but there's more solutions than there are problems today. And I think that it's important that we look into these solutions, John. So as we've gone over so many times before, food, water, shelter, self-defense, you're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. And of course, gold and silver, in our opinion, as wealth insurance, It's not meant as investment advice because the idea is that it's wealth insurance. It's not to be, speculating on. It's more about protect yourself against these financial crises. As history has shown, it has been very, very prevalent. But with that said as well, their fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation in the monetary system as well as the market, so we cannot put a date on the actual crash. But I actually think that Stephen Kendall, who we interviewed recently here at WAM, is right when he says there is a ghost crash. That's hashtag ghost crash, where we have been in this crash, in this tailspin forever. And Robert Kiyosaki, when we interviewed him recently, said the same thing. So I think that's important to understand, that it's not that we've been saying it forever and it hasn't happened. It's that it's been happening all along and we've just seen it papered over time and time again. So another example of a solution would have to be something like decentralized, properly fundamentally useful cryptocurrencies and blockchain infrastructure technology, not the kind that the government's forcing on people, not the centralized legal tender crap that they want to unravel over the coming years, because of course negative interest rates will probably lead into a cashless society, as we've seen in places like Sweden. But I do think that the decentralized versions, the kind that are private, especially things like Monero, those are the future marvels that are going to allow people to get out of this system. But most of all, the most important point to bring to the populace is responsibility and understanding of this system so that they can save themselves and their family, because it's going to be really bad for a lot of people. We already see the poverty rising at a dramatic rate. We see homelessness everywhere, and it's gotten to that point where it's almost completely unsustainable for the average person. I mean, look at the poverty rates, look at the unemployment rate. The official number is BS. The real number is in the labor force participation rate, which is a hidden number, really. They always tout these great economic indicators of employment. The employment numbers are great. Every government does it, and it's all BS. So we have to understand that we're seeing this homelessness everywhere. Inflation is destroying the price of living, and it's causing wages to be worth less and less while people ask for more government to save them from that same problem. So, John, what's your bottom line as we close this off?
Well, the bottom line here is that, the hidden inflation that's out there is really crushing people. And of course, I found here, I recently did research I did my Canadian version of the presentation of a cashless society, and I found out that the Canadian government and the banking system has printed, 10 times, basically 10% a year more currency into circulation. And then of course I was looking at, like, why is the inflation so low? Why is it 1.8? Well, I found that the weightedness, so how they calculate the CPI, they had 25.6% that was weighted of your total cost of your money of housing. Well, when I looked at Toronto and Vancouver, which has almost 50% of the population, they were at 75.5%. So clearly they were 50% off in their calculations, and that just shows you how bad the whole thing has become, because they're not calculating the real inflation ever seen in the housing market. That is, nobody's saying that, oh, housing prices are so high. It's like, that's actually almost not hyperinflation, but it's extremely high inflation that has happened in the Canadian dollar that nobody's talking about. And then of course now it's starting to trickling out into the economy, and you see that everywhere. But the bottom line here is that JP Morgan and all these other banks, I think their next move is going to be to completely move out of the dollar, move into cocaine, and run a cocaine business, because that is what JP Morgan here is doing underneath, everything. They're having their cocaine.
It's a profitable business.
Yeah, and I think Goldman Sachs and other banks are creating collateralized cocaine obligations, and then AIG, I think it's on it, making sure that they have their cocaine default swaps in case that the cocaine gets sunk or goes under with the boat or something like that. But no, this is the insanity. You got to remember, actually, that it's funny that cocaine and making money triggers the same spot in the brain. So of course that makes sense that they're using a whole bunch of cocaine, the bankers. But anyways, it's a whole Ponzi scheme that's getting unraveled, and everybody needs to protect themselves with real things, real commodities, and of course cryptocurrencies that brings you outside of the banking system, that you're not volatile here to the actual things that will happen when this whole Ponzi scheme unravels and things become really unhinged, because banks, everything is going to falter left, right, and center. It's going to be not very pleasant, but if you are prepared, you will at least have a lot better position to take advantage and maybe even thrive through the whole crisis, because there's so much opportunity that we could take and make here through this whole transitional period of the old empire system falling, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. You would have thought that that boat with cocaine would have gotten away in a rush. I mean, with all that cocaine ingested, you'd think they'd be pretty fast. But again, like JP Morgan does so often, they overrated themselves with too much BS or cocaine or whatever. They weighed themselves down and they couldn't get away. Unfortunate for them. But anyway, we will continue covering these subjects. I want people to definitely check out our Subscribe Star page linked below, and our Float page, flote.app. Float.app, because we are being heavily shadow banned here at WAM, and it's getting crazy out of control, and it's really starting to hurt us and infringe on our ability to bring you content all the time. They are killing this channel. It's a bloodbath. We've been cut down almost 80% since February. So the shadow banning has gotten really bad. So I hope people check that out, as well as the donation links, GoFundMe, Patreon, all those things linked below. We have an outro to this video where we give people options to check out. We're also on BitChute, and BITCHUTE, and you can imagine why we don't link our BitChute below, because we get demonetized right away. You know why? Because, well, BITCH is in the name of the site. It's unfortunate. It's a very unfortunate thing. But we are on BitChute at World Alternative Media, so make sure to check that out there. And there's also events coming up. So I want everyone to check out Anarchadelphia 2019, Anarchadelphia in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's coming up right away in September, and use promo code WAM and save 10%. A lot of amazing speakers out there. You can meet me, you can meet many people. There's lots of people speaking there that are really interesting, as well as a Winnipeg Crypto Conference coming up in October. Again, use promo code WAM. There's going to be a lot of amazing people speaking there on the subject of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and innovation, which is really important to the future of humanity and freedom and breaking free from this system. So I hope you check that below as well, and there's so much coming up. If you want, there's Anarchapulco too. We might as well let people know about that. I mean, WAM again, use promo code WAM and get your tickets to Anarchapulco 2020.
Yeah, and just one last thing that you didn't mention, Josh, of course, it's our affiliate with Gold Silver Money as well. That is down in the links below as well, to start help protecting yourself against the actual eventual demise of the fiat dollar.
Absolutely. There's so many options, so make sure to check the links below, check the description, share this video, like this video, press to be notified, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, because YouTube isn't showing people stuff anymore, and they're unsubscribing people and cutting out notifications and all that kind of stuff. So check back as much as you can. It's whatever. There's options. We will keep powering on, and the future looks bright. We just have to win this information war first. But anyway, thanks for going into this with us, John, and until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, as we are so heavily demonetized and shadow banned to a crazy extent. We have lost about 80% of our reach since the beginning of this year, as they rip away subscribers, etc. It has gotten out of control, and it's becoming more and more difficult to stay alive here on World Alternative Media, bringing you guys free content every day. You can also check our Bitcoin address in the description, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out on all these other alternatives like Subscribestar, where we are doing subscriber only content for people at the $4.99 US a month tier and up. We really appreciate it. You could tip us on there and pledge anything, but from $4.99 and up, we are giving people subscriber only content that you won't find here on YouTube. And speaking of YouTube, there are so many alternatives for YouTube these days, including BitChute, which we are on at World Alternative Media, as well as, of course, the new flote.app, flote.app, where they are truly replacing all of these social medias, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr, Reddit, and of course, Twitch and Patreon, all in one place, and it is truly incredible what they are doing. We are moving over there in mass, as well as BitChute, BitTube, Steemit at Josh Sigurdson, all those other places, as well as PocketNet. We are on as well at World Alternative Media. There's so many options today, and we're trying to get into as many of them as possible, because we need to back ourselves up. We are winning this information war, but we are getting to a point where they're cracking down more desperately than ever, and we got to do whatever we can to stay alive as it's getting more and more difficult all the time. We also have events coming up, including Anarchadelphia 2019, which will be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in September. Check out thestateofanarchy.com and anarchadelphia.com. Linked below, use promo code WAM, W-A-M, and save 10% on your tickets to this amazing conference as Anarchy is going viral. Also, make sure to check out the Winnipeg Crypto Conference in October. Also, use promo code WAM, another great event with amazing speakers, and of course, Anarchapulco, the one and only, in February 2020, which you can also use promo code WAM for WAM and save 10%. There's so many things that you can do to help independent media, including just pressing like, sharing, clicking the notification button, doing whatever you can to help keep this free information alive that's alternative to the mainstream. Anyway, until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.